Thank you for listening to the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. I'm Jay Jones, and I'm here for Text Driven Tuesday with George Mays. Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Did you get a good night's rest?
Yeah, I guess so.
You get that plumbing
bad.
fixed?
I
George,
don't want to talk about it.
I offered.
I don't want to talk about it.
I did offer to come.
I know.
You committed to the plumber.
Yeah.
Did he do you wrong?
Well, he just had to replace everything because I screwed it up.
What do you mean?
Like the fixture. I broke the fixture. He had to replace the fixture.
Like the sink?
Yeah.
Was it your kitchen sink?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he had to replace the faucet.
He had to replace the shutoff valve.
Uh-huh.
And the I was trying to replace the hose.
Uh-huh, yeah.
You text me, that's an easy fix.
Right.
And I knew immediately that this is going to take me hours. Anytime it's supposed to be an easy fix in my house, for some reason, I think I'm the first person to replace anything from when the house was originally built.
Yeah.
And so
it's always dangerous.
And so everything that I have to replace, the old stuff it's not made anymore. Like that's not the style anymore.
Uh-huh.
So everything's messed up. Like trying to change the door handle to the garage door. I couldn't find that type of handle. I was having the drill holes.
Got to go with
the drill holes in the door and everything because they just didn't make that kind of handle anymore.
Yeah.
Apparently, yeah. So they had to change out the whole, like everything underneath is new and
Okay.
new fixture. Yeah. So what should have been an easy fix,
Took a while.
turned into a big ordeal.
So being a plumber is a good job to have.
Oh yeah,
because
definitely.
This is like endless.
Yeah.
This goes on like
Mhm.
everywhere all the time. Always have something to do. If you're a
Well,
plumber.
what was so frustrating is I knew, hypothetically, what needed to be done. I just couldn't do it myself. So, yeah, Saturday morning was not super enjoyable. Let's just say I had to apologize to my family.
Oh no, George.
for my bad attitude.
Mm.
But it is what it is. And after it was all done, I was just thinking I should just be thankful that we have the resources to be able to repair this stuff.
Mm. Yeah. Or that you've got running water in the house.
Yeah.
And all kinds of stuff like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's good that you apologized. Kids need to see that.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
I bought them all sour gummy worms and told them I was sorry for being so sour.
Oh my goodness.
So
You're nice, George. My kids just would have got an apology. Oh,
yeah.
that was creative. That was a good lesson. All right, shall we jump in here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hebrews chapter 9. If you have a text, you want to grab a text for Text Driven Tuesday. We're going through the sermon, Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 15 and going to verse 22. So we're going to jump in here. And do you want to give us a maybe just a very brief like connection to what preceded?
He's talking about the comparison between the old and new covenant.
Mhm.
He's shown in verses 1 through 10 the weaknesses of the first covenant because it's an earthly tabernacle with animal sacrifices and rituals that can't actually do anything.
Yeah.
For the human heart. Verses 11 through 14 show Christ's superiority. He didn't enter into an earthly tabernacle. He entered into heaven itself.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't offer animal sacrifices. He offered his own blood, and that blood is able to actually purify the conscience and make us acceptable to God.
Right.
But now in verses 15 through 22, he's asking the question, why did there need to be a blood sacrifice? Like, okay,
Yeah,
here's the new covenant. Christ, he is saying that Christ is the mediator of this covenant, but he died. He took his own blood into the Holy of Holies. Why? what purpose?
Yeah.
And can we really trust this covenant? Can we trust a covenant with a mediator who died in such a brutal fashion?
I liked your your kind of like attention getter was like why are Christians so obsessed with blood? And you had several quotes. One of them was from John Adams, second president of the United States. Was he like a deist, I guess?
He claimed to be a Christian while rejecting pretty much all the essentials of the faith, like the Trinity.
He wasn't a Christian.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He'd call himself a Christian, but was rejecting Orthodox Christian beliefs. But he called Christianity the most bloody religion.
Yeah. And we sing about it. We have several songs.
Yeah.
Sing one.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a fountain filled with blood. Drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunge beneath that flood, lose all their guilty stains.
Yeah.
What kind of started me in this direction was I ran across a book that's on Amazon. It's called Obsessed with Blood. The crazy things that Christians believe.
Written by him?
And it's written by, well, he does it anonymously. Ex-pastor is what he calls himself. Because he doesn't want to deal with all the Christians that
ex-pastor, now
critique him.
Now atheist?
Probably an atheist. Yeah, probably an atheist. But he did make a good observation. Christians seem to be obsessed with blood. We talk about it. We sing about it. We drink it in the Lord's Supper. Symbolically. Right. And I think it's good to be reminded, like have our attention drawn to this, because we talk about it so much and we sing about it so much that we can forget. Not everyone knows why we talk about blood so much. And so it can be really it can come across as this weird obsession.
Well, we really are desensitized to how weird that would sound.
Yeah.
To someone who's never been around, never been on Christianity at all.
Right.
And then to come into like a service and you're like, man, the stuff you guys are talking about is
right.
Like, what is this?
Yeah.
We're really desensitized to it.
Yeah. We go back to the earliest accusations against Christianity, and two of those accusations are that Christians were cannibals and that they drank blood. That's what Pliny the Younger was writing about to the emperor, right? Because that's what the Lord's Supper was. We eat his flesh, we drink his blood, and the Romans. There were rumors going around that I didn't want to bring this up in the sermon because it was a little too grotesque without like trying to introduce it. They thought that Christians were abducting babies and killing babies and eating them and drinking their blood. That was one of the criticisms, because they'd hear this talk about blood and eating the flesh of Christ, and they had no idea what was going on.
And the Romans would just expose their exposure. So the trash, people would throw their trash in the street.
Yeah.
They probably had some method of picking it up, whatever, or they would just take their babies to some location and just leave it. They didn't. That's their kind of way of abortion. They just do it after, unless you're really wealthy and you had access to a form of poison that was very dangerous to take, because if you took too much, then you would die. So they're collecting all these babies up because they're rescuing them, like they're adopting them.
Right.
It's early Christian ministry,
Mhm.
and also all the babies are like, what are they doing with all these babies?
Right.
Well, what's this ritual of blood
Mm.
that they don't let us see? Which is interesting if you think about, right?
Right.
Because they did not allow non-believers or non-members
It seemed like they had closed
Right.
communion, right?
into what they were doing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that the Romans they thought that Christians were cannibals drinking blood, and we have to be able to answer these questions that people are going to have. Maybe hopefully no one thinks that we're cannibals who drink blood nowadays, but we do talk about blood a lot. We sing about blood a lot. If an unbeliever or even a new Christian comes in and they hear us singing about there's this fountain that's filled with blood and any sinner that plunges into that blood will be cleansed, they may have no idea what we're talking about. There may be people who have grown up in churches that aren't quite sure what that's talking about.
Yeah.
So we've got we need to be clear in what we're teaching and explaining these things, not just simply going about our tradition and singing these songs that we've just always sung, but we have no idea what they
Right.
mean. Actually being deliberate
Yeah.
in that, and I think this passage is addressing that, and it helps us to understand why blood. Why did Jesus have to die a bloody death?
Yeah. So that's what you sought to show from this passage. Why and how blood?
Right.
Jesus' bloody death is necessary for the
Mhm.
new covenant. That's your proposition statement up front.
Mhm.
Jesus' death is necessary for the new covenant. And you sought to answer that by giving 3 reasons why. 3 reasons why Jesus' bloody death was necessary for the new covenant. And I think it'd be interesting for us to even maybe unpack even a little more as we move through this. What's behind and why blood? So I had one more question as you were asking why. I was like, well, I've got one more, but we'll get to it as we work through. So the first reason why Jesus' bloody death is necessary for the new covenant is so that God's people would receive all the blessings. All the blessings, George.
You want me to read the passage first, Jay?
Oh yeah, did we do that? We do that here still.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Though I'm not a big fan of the ESV.
George, well, I
translation
got to
here.
tell you, buddy. I got to tell you, I have this amazing ESV Bible that my parents gave me. See
Mhm.
this for graduation?
Yeah,
Schuyler Bible.
yeah, it's nice.
And it's like super, super good.
Yeah.
But as I've encountered many passages, even in preaching in John, and I've seen that the NASB was better. And then looking at the Legacy Standard Bible,
Mhm.
I really, really am thinking about switching.
Are
I know you're like, we shouldn't switch because then everybody at church had to buy a new Bible. But just in the prologue of John's Gospel, where it talks about Jesus as the only begotten God
Mhm.
and the only begotten Son in John 3:16,
Mhm.
you just can't. The ESV
Yeah,
is lacking. That's a pretty huge element of theology that is
Yeah.
communicated there.
Yeah.
So, and then you're going to come in here and tell me this stuff this Sunday. Just
yeah.
giving me more and more reasons why.
Well, the ESV is not alone in translating it this way. New International Christian Standard Bible, they all translate it this way, and then the King James and the New King James, they translate it as Testament. But that's the
same
word.
word.
That's the word that they use for covenant.
Right, it's the same thing.
I mean, throughout Hebrews, every time it says covenant,
It's testament.
Testament, right? So it's the majority reading. So the ESV is. I wish they would have translated the word consistently,
The word for covenant. That's what you're saying.
but they're interpreting it.
So as George reads, you'll see a switch. He'll be saying the word covenant the majority of the time, but then here in the middle he'll change to will at verses 16 and 17.
And it's the same word.
It's the same word.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. Beginning of verse 15 and going through verse 22. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you." And in the same way he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins.
All right. Well, let's jump in here, George. Number one, first reason, so that God's people would receive all the blessings.
Right.
You began by talking about the mediator of a new covenant,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, which we've already touched on several times before, so
Right.
don't need to spend a lot of time on it. But
Right.
the old covenant mediated by Moses and then by the priests. Now the new covenant is mediated by someone better than Moses and a greater high priest,
Right.
who is of the order of Melchizedek and lives forever.
Mm-hmm.
So he secures an eternal covenant.
Right.
Let's talk about, though, the sacrificial death component.
Okay.
Why is a sacrificial death necessary to secure blessings?
Mm.
So people might wonder that. Okay, so people grow up around Christianity. They could say, okay, well, I got it. Jesus' death was for my sins,
Mm-hmm.
but they may miss this element that his death's necessary so that you could actually not just be forgiven. Because think about it, God could just forgive you of your sins and leave you alone, but to secure this amazing blessing and inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the inheritance and make it clear what it was in the old covenant, I
Mhm.
think. So then I think this could make an interesting conversation.
Okay.
Because some people have questions about, have you ever heard the term replacement theology? Did you know I was going to go here?
No, I did not. But yes, I have heard of.
Could you see how this could be a perfect place to talk about it?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So we did have a question submitted, and I thought I would hold off. Did you see the question? I'll pull it up. We had a question submitted to the podcast,
Mm-mm.
and I wrote back to him and I said, hey, this would be good. We'll actually talk about the stuff because we've got an episode planned on biblical interpretation.
Uh-huh.
And it was a genuine question. This guy wasn't trying to be like, a contrarian, or some people, they write questions. They're not really questions. They're just trying to, be rude. You know what I mean? But no,
Yeah.
this was a genuine question.
Okay.
He's curious. And it would have fit perfectly with the biblical interpretation. I was hanging on to it. And then it would even went into our eschatology discussion. But I mean, this is like perfect to discuss it.
Okay.
This is what the podcast is for, right?
Yeah.
Because I know some people were thinking, well, hang on, George.
Mhm.
You're saying the inheritance in the old covenant's the promised land.
Right.
Well, what about the new covenant? You're saying there's no promised land? There's no promised land promise?
Uh-huh.
And then they may
Right.
not know the terms, but, and I don't think you would take the title replacement theologian. But, people
I found it.
People would try to label you with that, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're not dispensational, so dispensationalists, they hold to two people of God,
Mhm.
Israel and the church. There's differences even within that camp, but the more classic dispensationalists would say the church is just a parenthesis in the purposes of God.
Mhm.
And so Israel, God gives all these promises, including the promised land, and then Christ comes. They reject Christ, so there's a stop in the program for Israel, and there's a parentheses for the church. There will be a secret rapture at some point in the future. The church will be raptured, and
The church is out of here.
and it's like God presses the pause button, unpauses it, and
Go time for Israel.
picks up Israel again, with all the promises, including the promised land.
Right.
Yeah, and if you don't hold to that,
And a king, and Christ as king over Israel,
right,
in Jerusalem.
right. If you don't hold to that, they'll throw out your replacement. You hold their replacement theology.
Sometimes even a liberal. I think it'll be a good discussion because I hold to the historic premill view, so it's different than that. But they'll even call historic premill people liberal.
Yeah. It's and again, there's a spectrum.
Right.
Usually, the term replacement theology is a pejorative.
Right.
It's usually not trying to accurately explain a person's position. It's usually thrown out as, well, you just hold the replacement theology, and it's just meant to shut down the argument.
So this guy wasn't Lawrence Stanley. He wrote. You can see it. If you go to our episodes, there's a comment on the Trinity episode that we did last Friday.
Okay.
The question is, if someone subscribes to replacement theology, do they reject Micah 5:2, or do they reinterpret it, or how do they reinterpret that to be ruler in Israel? You don't have to go there. It just says that it's talking about the Messiah, Christ, coming, and the context is that he'll be ruler in Israel. I mean, if you're already almost there, you can find it.
Yeah.
So the idea is that Christ is ruling over Israel in the Promised Land.
Right.
And he says he knows. He continues to write. He knows that there are various positions, even amongst people that are Calvinist camps about the future of Israel, and there are those that believe there are replacement, like a full replacement. So how would they interpret that? So we don't have to jump into the Micah 5:2 because I think we can deal with that in the eschatology stuff. But I know a similar question may have come up because I know the people that are of older generations in our church, they grew up in the probably in the dispensational camp, and so they probably have this question like, "Hey, you said in the old covenant the inheritance is the promised land, but then you say, hey, he has inaugurated this new covenant. His death, his sacrificial death, has secured by his blood an inheritance in the new covenant." So let's talk about it.
Okay.
I did think it's very interesting. You looked up all of the times that the word inheritance is used, and it's almost always used of land.
Yes.
Okay.
I probably would say it always includes land, though it can include other things as well as land.
Okay.
So you get stuff, but you also get land, right? And so you go back to the Old Testament, and this term is used somewhere around 200 plus times.
That's a lot of times.
It is. But primarily in Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Psalms. Now, just those books should kind of clue you into how the majority of, and it's big. So you'll get like, I think it's used maybe once in Genesis. You get the Numbers, and it's like 34 or something like that. Like a massive leap in how many times it's used. Right. So just in those books that it's primarily used should be kind of clue us into how it's being used, because these are books that are interested in Israel coming into the land, the promised land, and it's called their inheritance. Sometimes it's used of Israel as God's inheritance.
Yes, but it's clear when it's talking about this God's inheritance.
Right.
And Ephesians does both as well.
Yeah.
Our inheritance and God's inheritance.
Right.
Yeah.
But primarily it's talking about the land, and sometimes it's talking to the Levites. They won't have an inheritance because
They
God is their inheritance.
Yeah, they don't have land.
Right? They don't have land. But for the other tribes, they have land, and it's the inheritance. That's what it is. Joshua chapter 11 verse 23. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel.
Okay.
After this long section in Joshua where they're casting lots to determine exactly where the land falls for the tribes.
Right.
At the end of the book, he calls Israel together and he has his final words, telling them to choose this day whom you will serve. And after that, it says, so Joshua sent the people away, every man to his inheritance.
Right.
So to your particular place in the promised land. Psalm 105 gives like I think the best kind of summary of it, because he draws from the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to God gave the land as an inheritance to the people. So there's this land aspect to this word inheritance. It carries a theological component to it.
Right.
Almost everywhere it's got this theological component.
Yeah.
When we talk about inheritance, we talk about when our parents die someday, they'll leave the inheritance to us. Well, they're not talking. There is a piece of land, right? Like their house. We get the house, right? But it's more. It's their property. But there's not really a theological component to it,
right?
But in the Old Testament, when they're talking about an inheritance, it's not just my parents own this house. It's my parents have this land because God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that we would have this land.
Yeah.
That's why they couldn't sell the land in perpetuity, because the land belonged to God.
Right.
And God gives it to who he wants. And so so every 7 years, if they've sold a piece of land, it reverts back to the original owner. That's why Proverbs says that you're not supposed to move I think it's in Deuteronomy. You're not supposed to move the
boundary markings.
Yeah, the boundary markers, because that's their land that God's given to them. This is your land. You can't move the stones so that you get a little bit more and they get a little bit less.
Yeah.
Right. So it's got heavy theological connotations to it.
Right.
So when he says that he's the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, there's Old Testament weight that's being brought over.
Right.
Right. But we have to remember the way in which the New Testament interprets the Old Testament. And the promises to the nation of Israel, where they're one nation amongst many nations.
Right.
So God gives them land. He gives them a country. We have to remember exactly what's going on in the story.
Yeah.
So the whole Bible really can be summarized as this is a story about land. You go back to Genesis chapter 2, and God has created a special land, right? The Garden of Eden, and he places Adam in the garden.
Yeah.
He gives Adam a law, a command: don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. On the day you eat of it, you will surely die. So here's this special land. God's special person is in the land. He has a law. If he keeps the law, he stays in the land, right? And the land, he's supposed to work it and keep it. Well, what happens when you work and keep a garden?
It looks awesome.
It looks awesome, but
and you can expand it.
It also grows, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that Eden, the garden, it starts in a place, but it's supposed to expand
As they're fruitful and multiply
Yeah,
and fill the
I mean,
earth.
if Adam and Eve are going to have children, they're not going to stay in just this one place. They're going to fill the earth, right?
Yeah.
And as they go, they're working and keeping the garden, and the garden is supposed to fill the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Of course, Adam and Eve don't do that. They rebel, and so they're exiled out of the land.
Yeah.
To the east. They are sent east of Eden.
They're kicked out.
Right.
Which is surprisingly the direction that Israel is cast out.
Right. So now you get to the story of the nation of Israel, and God has a special place, a special land for them. He's going to put his people there, and he gives them a law. And if you keep the law, you'll be blessed. Right?
You get to stay in the
You get
land.
to stay in the land. You'll be prosperous, and it's even talked about in this Edenic kind of language. It's the garden of God.
It's contingent upon their obedience.
Yeah, but of course they rebel,
Right.
and they are cast.
They're cast
to
out
the
of the
east, to the east, out of the land. They experience death.
land.
Right?
Mhm. Yeah, we did this. We talked about it in Habakkuk.
Yeah.
He's lamenting to God, like, look how terrible your people are. Like, how long are you going to let them be like this?
Right.
And he brings the Babylonians,
Yeah.
and they're carried away.
So now in the new covenant with Christ, who is a new Adam, we're missing a component of the story.
Mhm.
Where's the land? Right.
Right.
But now Christ is promised not just a strip of land; he's promised the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He's going to subdue the world, and by the time you get to Revelation 21 and 22, there is a new heavens and a new earth that looks like the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Right. There's garden terms
Uh-huh.
all over it.
Right.
There's the tree of life is there.
Right.
There's no more death.
Right.
All the curse is gone, and God dwells amongst his people in a new heavens and new earth that is like the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
So the original garden has now been fulfilled.
Right.
All of God's purposes weren't just for a little piece of land along the Mediterranean.
Uh-huh.
God's promises actually were that the garden would fill the world.
Yeah.
Interesting, in Romans chapter 4, Paul picks up on this. This isn't the invention of a replacement theologian. All right.
Right.
It says that Romans chapter 4, verse 13, for the promise to Abraham and his offspring that he would be heir of the world.
Right.
So Paul's saying that even the promises that were given to Abraham were not just for a little strip of land. It was that the world would be his.
Right.
And he would be heir. What do you call what an heir receives? An inheritance.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah.
so the promised inheritance that goes all the way back to Abraham is that he would inherit the world.
Mm-hmm.
And now it comes through Christ, who gives the promised eternal inheritance.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a big story that starts in Genesis 2 and goes all the way to Revelation 22.
I think people's question might be, I want to try to be as accurate as I can, and how someone would object.
Yeah.
Micah. So, for instance, we go to Micah 5:2, says, it begins in 1. Now muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Siege is laid against us. With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek. You can obviously see the messianic imagery. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from Ancient of Days. So I think the question would be like, hey, if this is true, what about God's promise that he made to Israel, that this ruler who will come from Judah, even this Bethlehem of Ephrathah is this small region.
Mm-hmm.
So even within that clan, like the smaller clan,
Right.
there's this ruler who's coming forth is from Ancient of Days. It's Emmanuel, God with us.
Yeah.
That this person from the tribe of Judah will rule in Israel.
Right.
So that would be their question. They'll say, well, does this mean that God hasn't fulfilled his promise? And there are a number of ways to answer this question.
Yeah.
So I've been reading through, as you know, with the kids in the morning, Romans. And it is interesting when you are in the book of Romans to see the things that Paul is doing with how he quotes the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, in Romans, where is it at? Is it in Romans 10? I will take them that are not my people. Where is it at? Romans 9.
Okay.
Those who were not my people, I will call my people. And her who was not beloved, I will call beloved. And in that very place was said to him, you are not my people. There they will be called sons of the living God. Now, he's applying that to Gentiles. But what he's quoting from is in, where is it at? Let me find it.
He's quoting from Hosea.
Yes. But who does it apply to in Hosea?
Right.
It doesn't apply to Gentiles in Hosea.
Right.
It applies to Israel.
Right.
He's telling to them. But see how Paul uses it is he uses it as he's describing Gentiles. So he's taking a passage that does refer to Old Testament Israel.
Right.
He's applying it to the New Covenant and to Gentiles.
Right.
Because he's already said that he's made very clear, not only in Romans, but in others, that Gentiles are grafted into
this was
Christ, the true Israel.
Yeah, this was, again, I think that one of the ways that we have to understand this is let the New Testament interpret the Old Testament. This is the divinely inspired apostles who are understanding what's going on. And Paul says this was a mystery because in the Old Testament, you've got Gentiles coming to Jerusalem to worship.
And some of them become full Israelites.
But it's not really
through
spelled,
circumcision.
It's not spelled out exactly how this happens.
Right.
And Paul says, here's a mystery, that God is taking the two and he's making them one. That's Ephesians chapter 2.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Yeah,
next.
You've got Romans. You got Romans 11. You've got two trees. One is Israel, and one is the Gentiles.
Yes.
But what does God do? He cuts off the unbelieving branches, the unbelieving Israelites, and he grafts in believing Gentiles.
Yes.
So the believing Gentiles, they become Israel. They come into Israel. There's only one tree. They're being put in by faith in Christ. They're becoming Israel.
They don't replace Israel. I think this is the confusion.
There's not a replacement.
I don't know anybody who thinks like, hey, God's done with ethnic Jews and we replaced them. Gentiles replaced them.
Right.
That's not it at all. It's a temporary hardening, as Paul says, that's come upon ethnic Jews, and then the Gentiles are grafted in by grace. It couldn't be more clear than in Ephesians 2. Now, I asked this question out at when I was out at school of the theology professor out there, and he didn't give me a straight answer because I don't think there is one if you don't hold to this position. I don't. What can you do with it? This is the most solid that you can get to say this is not replacement theology. This is Gentiles being grafted in to the commonwealth of Israel.
Right.
It couldn't be more clear. This is what it says. I'll start reading in verse 11. Therefore remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel. Commonwealth.
Right.
If you look it up in Greek, I'm just going to do it real quick.
All right.
It's the word for the polis, which means like a city or like something that has the citizenry.
Okay.
Let's see what it is, because I had to make sure. Like are these the same words? And they are. The Commonwealth. I can't select one word on this thing. It's not working. Not working for me, George. It's just selecting the whole verse, of course. I don't want the whole one. I just want that. No.
This is high quality entertainment here.
No, it is. It actually is.
It's
You have an app on your phone? Okay, here we go. I think I found it.
Commonwealth polity.
Yes.
Citizen. It's where we get our word
Politeas.
for. It's where we get our word for polity.
Politeas. Same word used as we move down through the text. Okay, listen for it. You ready? You were alienated from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Talk about discouraging.
Right.
So, like,
But this is the old covenant, right?
Yes.
The Old Testament. It's the nation of Israel are the people of God. They're the ones that receive
Right.
the promises. They're the one that have the temple and the priest and the sacrifices, and the Gentiles are Gentiles.
well,
right?
just think about the supposed Christians today that say God accepts all other religions. There's multiple ways to God.
Yeah.
And what do you do with this passage?
Yeah.
It says that at one time you were without God and had no hope in the world because you're a Gentile.
Yeah.
But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by
Yeah,
the
there it is.
blood,
Uh-huh.
the blood of Christ. There it is. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances. This fits right in with what we're talking about in Hebrews.
Mhm.
That he might create in himself one new man in the place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body,
Mm.
not two,
Right.
one body, through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father. So then, you are no longer strangers and aliens. You are fellow citizens
Mhm.
with the saints and members of the household of God. So there's the question. In this text, there is only one citizenry discussed.
Right.
That is the Commonwealth of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the thing to remember. I don't think I've become an ethnic Jew.
Right.
We'll probably hash this out more when we talk about eschatology.
Mhm.
I do think that there is a place in the future for ethnic Israel. I think there will be a mass conversion of ethnic Jews at the end, and that will be the resurrection of the dead. And Christ will return. Of course, I believe he'll reign on earth for 1,000 years with a rod of iron. But even if I didn't believe that, and I was an amill or a post-mill, I would still believe that in the new creation, Christ would be reigning
Mhm.
from, because I don't think he just like disintegrates all of reality. I think, elements are burned up, whatever, but the earth is regenerated and he will rule on the new earth
Uh-huh.
from a place
Uh-huh.
and he'll be a Jew forever.
Right.
There will be people around him
Mhm.
that are Jews forever.
Right.
I don't think with the new creation wipes out ethnic distinctions.
Right.
I
No,
think
I
when
don't
we're
think so either.
resurrected from the dead, it'll be me,
Uh-huh.
and there will be Jews.
Right.
And what God does with his plan as he administers the new heaven and the new earth, that's his prerogative.
Right.
So I don't believe I've replaced Israel at all.
Right.
I just believe by grace I've been engrafted into Christ
Mhm.
and have become a member by grace of the Commonwealth of Israel.
Right. Right.
That's it.
And he rules right now.
Right.
That's Peter's speech in Acts 2. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the presence of the Spirit is evidence that Christ has been raised to sit at the right hand of the Father.
Right.
So he is ruling in the midst of Israel right now.
Mm.
It hasn't been consummated,
Mm-hmm.
so he's not physically physically in the new heavens and new earth, ruling, but he rules through his church.
Yeah, and the inheritance.
Mhm.
So we took a long trail
No, that's good.
to get
That's
to,
good. Yeah.
because I think when people see like what is the what do we inherit
Right.
in the new covenant?
Right. Yeah.
It's everything.
It's everything. Yeah. We inherit the world.
Yeah.
We inherit the world. What does he? Now I'm gonna have to go looking for something real quick here. Let me see if I can find it. Stall for time, Jay.
How about the universe, George? You ever think that if we inherit everything, how about the universe? You going to become a colonizer of Mars with me?
Yeah. Oh, here it is. I love these verses at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. He says, "So let no one boast in men, for all things are yours. whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future, all are yours, and you are Christ, and Christ is God's.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that great? Aren't those great verses?
Yeah, that's good.
Everything belongs to us in Christ.
Yeah.
So we will be co-heirs with Jesus of all things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All of this comes through the death of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And like I said, I'm fine. I'm fine with in the new heaven and the new earth that there's a place of land, and that's where he sets up he reigns from.
Yeah.
And the people that are ethnic Jews, they're there in that land. That's cool because I'm taking Mars. You know, I'm gonna expand out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know. We don't know what it's going to be like on the new earth. We have no idea. We just know that Christ will be there. He'll be there. It will be it will be Eden glorified. And there will be no more death, crying, pain, suffering. We will never be separated from God. The devil will be destroyed. There will be no opportunity for him to ever
no possibility
deceive
of
again. But the details, we just don't know. But we will inherit all of these things. We'll inherit all of these things because of Christ.
Yeah, and this is to emphasize, they couldn't hold the inheritance ever.
Yeah,
they kept losing it.
The inheritance under the old covenant was contingent upon obedience. Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy chapter 28, they're promised that the land will be prosperous, you'll be fruitful and multiply, you will live at peace in the land unless you rebel.
And they kept
did. I mean, under the old covenant, under the law, where the law is written on stone tablets, they are unable to they're unable to keep the inheritance. So in Christ, so you've got this dilemma, right? According to the law, under the law, they can only get the inheritance by obedience,
right? And
they can't do it.
And it's not like it's.
But God has promised to Abraham that your offspring will inherit the land.
And Paul, Paul says singular offspring.
Right.
He makes it clear.
So you've got this this conflict. The people can't do it because of covenant breaking, but God has promised to Abraham that they would. So how is this going to be reconciled? It's reconciled in Christ.
Right. Yeah.
Christ has lived a perfect life. That's his act of obedience.
Yeah.
Right. He has kept the law, and so the covenant promises go to him. They go to him. He is the only true Israelite. There's only ever been one true Israelite who's ever lived, and it's Jesus. He is the only one who
has right to the inheritance.
Has the right to the inheritance. But he represents us, and by dying on the cross, he takes the covenant curse, all of our covenant breaking, he takes upon himself. So he suffers the curse. We get the blessings.
Right. Yeah.
But he rises from the dead, victorious over sin and death, because it wasn't his sin, it was ours. He was our representative.
Yeah.
And so by rising from the dead, all of the promises, they go to him and those of us who are in him.
We spent a lot of time on that, didn't we?
I think that's good. I wasn't expecting that direction. But
well,
I
just
good.
know.
I think you're right.
As I'm listening, I try to put myself in like other people's minds. Like, what questions did people have in here?
Yeah.
And because I want to raise them on the podcast, and we can talk about them. I just thought that would be one for sure that some people probably would have.
When we read the Old Testament, we have to remember that the things that were promised to the nation of Israel were always pointing to something greater. Calvin talks about this. He says that the promises of God were not just so the Israelites could enjoy all these fleshly blessings in a full stomach.
But he burned Servetus, so we can't listen.
That's true.
He's bad.
That's true.
He's a bad guy.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people do. They I don't want to I don't want to debate you on this right now, Jay, but some of the criticism of chilialism or millennial thought in the early church was these people are just focusing on these earthly blessings.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that about you, Jay.
Right.
I'm just saying that was a criticism of the early church. Those who weren't holding to a premillennial reign, they were saying this is focused on earthly pleasures and just having enough to, filling your belly and just having a good time and all of this. Whether that was true of that time or not, I don't know. But I think a lot of us will read the Old Testament like, here's the promises that were given to Israel, and isn't it great? But those promises were always meant to point forward to something even better.
Mm-hmm.
It was those Israelites that were content with just those things were the ones that actually didn't inherit the actual promises.
Right.
Ahab wanted that plot of land. He wanted Nadab's plot of land, and he wasn't going to be satisfied until he got that plot of land. And by letting Jezebel murder Nadab, and he got that that earthly piece of land, he missed out on the eternal inheritance. He missed the promise that this piece of land was actually supposed to be pointing him towards. And if we are content with just earthly blessings and just being happy here on earth, we're going to miss the actual promises that God has given in Christ. They're so much bigger and so much better than what we're content with. It's that C.S. Lewis quote where the kids are just content with mud pies when they don't even have a concept of a holiday at the beach. They're content to just sit in mud. That's us. We're content with physical pleasures and physical gain and all of this, and we'll miss out on what God's got for us in Christ. One thing that I tried to slip it in there. I tried to bring attention to it, but couldn't really draw. I was really close to just doing verse 15 yesterday and just preaching verse 15. We were talking about Calvin. We've got he's the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. So there is a special group of people that are called. This is Old Testament language too, because God called Israel.
Yes.
This was not a free for all the nations. It was for Israel. But then it says they may receive the promised eternal inheritance since a death occurred that redeems them.
Right.
I can't escape thinking about limited atonement there.
Yeah, you're talking about the definite atonement. And I think this might have been the passage. I told you my friend was preaching through Hebrews, and I got a phone call one Sunday morning. It was like 6:30 a.m. So I always get up before the family and go in the living room and open my Bible up. I start to think through my sermon, like go through it, prepare myself, get a phone call. It's my buddy, and I think it's this text.
Really?
He's like, JJ, I don't know what to do. Robert, if you're listening, I'm glad it happened to you.
Yeah.
But this was the beginning of the end for him.
Yeah. Because
before this, he would have been like, what is that guy's name? Norman Geisler. He was big into Norman Geisler.
Oh, yeah.
And man, we spent so many days, like we were good friends. He was definitely anti-Calvinist back then. We'd go duck hunting and we'd be like, no. I'd be like, no, this is it. This is this. Hang on. Bam! And then we continue talking. But this was the beginning of the end for him because he's like, I don't know what to do because the passage, it clearly says, like, I see what it clearly says. I'm like, man,
right. What do you want to say?
What do you want me to say? You just preach what's there and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, Christ died a death to redeem those who are called.
Yeah.
That's what that verse says.
The called.
Yeah.
Yeah. The called out. The elect.
It's not.
Can you use that word? Is that bad?
Yeah, I don't think it's. It's not.
It's not the same word.
It's not the same
but
word.
That's what
it is.
That's what it's meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those that
who are called will receive the promised eternal inheritance. That's perseverance of the saints.
Right.
So we got election, perseverance of the saints. We got definite atonement. They receive it because a death has been paid that redeems them from the transgressions
Right.
committed under the first covenant.
Yeah, that's a slam dunk, man. We could spend another
Yeah.
hour talking about this one verse.
Yeah.
But we've got an episode planned for that, George.
Yeah,
so we'll not
we
do
do.
it this
Okay.
time
All right.
because we've got one coming. We're gonna do them, right? The Doctrines of
Oh,
Grace
yeah.
coming
Okay.
up.
Well, I think again, this is a place where you need to pay attention to the words that are used.
Mhm.
Don't just fly through this verse. What is the pronoun there, and we talked about this
Mhm.
on Friday. What's the antecedent? What's the object of that pronoun?
Right.
Those who are called, them. A death has occurred that redeems them, redeems those who are called.
Mm.
Right. So you got to pay attention to these words. The author of Hebrews, he's inspired by the Holy Spirit to write not just the thought, the idea, but to write the actual words that you're reading. So
I don't
pay
see any
attention to those words.
zazams in here.
You don't see any zays.
I don't see any zazam pronouns in here, George.
Yeah.
That might be further proof of definite atonement.
Uh-huh.
What do you think?
That's right.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
I couldn't resist. What would you do without me, George? You come in here a little
The
melancholy.
sky is the limit.
You come in here a little melancholy. You sit down, and we're done, and you're feeling pretty good.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
All right.
You're
Well,
right.
shall we move on to the next point?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. The second reason there is that Christ's bloody death is necessary for the new covenant is so that the curses would be enforced.
Mhm.
Verses 16 and 17.
Yeah.
As you said, as you began this, you said, okay, listen, I read a bazillion commentaries,
Right.
and you're texting me like all week long, and
Uh-huh.
you're like, I wish that I knew what this meant. And these commentators say, like, no one knows really what this means. And I'm just kind of giggling and laughing and saying, now you get a little taste of Ecclesiastes, of the little taste of the pain of Ecclesiastes.
Uh-huh.
And it all comes down to this word, the word that's translated as covenant. And what I thought was interesting is how many times the word is used and translated as covenant.
Right.
And then you're like, so share that with us, because I think that is relevant in this discussion.
Yeah.
It seems to be a pretty weighty argument.
Right. So the word is diatheke.
Mm-hmm.
It is found 33 times in the New Testament.
Well, hang on, let's back up.
Okay.
We're just assuming people listen to the sermon. Explain verses 16 to 17.
Okay. So let me just read it again. It
Okay.
says, for where a will is involved. So a will or a last will and testament is the way that the ESV is understanding it. This is the majority understanding of this passage. So the King James, we talked about it translates it as testament,
Mm-hmm.
which a last will and testament. This is a legal document, just outlining how someone wants their inheritance to be
Right.
shared after their death. Right.
Yeah.
So the
You know-
people that hold on to the will, they go back up to, well, there's an inheritance.
Yeah.
Right. So
You know what?
we get the inheritance.
You ever make
because
a will?
Christ said, I have not made a will. I need to, but I have not.
When you're in the Army, like, you know what your job is, right?
Right.
You're like, hey, and you get deployment orders.
Uh-huh.
Then they take you through this out processing station on the day that you deploy. So you wake up super early in the morning, and you're like, it's way early. You'll all meet at a location. Then we went over to this gym in Fort Sill. They have these different stations for you to go through. Like, make sure all your shots are good to go. They'll like, whatever. They try to give me the anthrax, and they're like, is your wife pregnant? And I was like, yep. And they're like, well, we're not going to give it to you. And I'm like, yes. Anthrax. I didn't want that shot, but
Okay.
anyway, I digress. So you go to these different stations, and one of them you go to is you sit down, and it's like a legal team there, and they're like, okay, let's make your will. And you're like, oh, dang. Then reality hits you
Wow.
square in the
Yeah,
face,
yeah.
and you make your will out.
Right. Wow.
So I know all the soldiers were thinking about it when you were preaching it.
Right.
Last will. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
But yeah, you're right. Like the will, like we can understand that.
Right. And this,
That
this
the
is,
will is a covenant. It's like a legal covenant you're making that isn't enacted unless you die.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
So this is the way that Calvin, Owen, Spurgeon, uh, Gill, Matthew Henry.
Luther.
Didn't see Luther in any of the stuff I was
R.C.
looking
Sproul?
at.
John MacArthur.
John MacArthur, John Piper.
So what you're telling me is you're wrong.
It's it's a definite possibility.
I'm just teasing.
It's a definite possibility.
I'm just teasing you, George. I'm just teasing you. I think you presented some good argumentation for where you landed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm convinced. I don't know if anyone else is, but I was convinced.
Okay.
What's interesting, I didn't bring this out. There's actually another word. So a will is they had wills in the ancient Greek world.
Right.
So the argument is he's using wordplay.
Right. Because there's a different word for will.
So it's diatheke is covenant or it could be a will. In ancient Greek, so he's using wordplay.
So would they use that word?
Yeah.
They would for will?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that there's another word for covenant in the ancient Greek, syntheke, and it's never used in the Septuagint.
Okay.
So the only word that's used for covenant is diatheke. So when God cuts a covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15, it's not the more technical word for a covenant.
Well,
it's diatheke.
You're bringing up the Septuagint is good weight because it was already in place by the time of Jesus and Paul, and they would have used it.
And the author of Hebrews, he uses the Septuagint. It's,
right.
I mean, whenever he quotes the Old Testament, he's using the Septuagint.
It's hard. I don't think people really understand. I think people assume, like Jesus and all the apostles were using a Hebrew Bible, but the Bible that was in widespread use was the Greek Old Testament.
Right.
And that's confusing, I think, sometimes to people, but it does supply good evidence for your argument.
Yeah. So the word is used 33 times in the New Testament. Out of those 33 times, 17 times are found in Hebrews. I mean, we're talking about covenant all over the place. Right. It's found almost 300 times in the Septuagint. That's a lot. That's a lot of times.
That's a lot of times.
And the only place where this word would be translated as a last will and testament would be these two verses. There's an argument that it could be what Paul's talking about in Galatians chapter 3, but even there, I think a covenant is more likely.
Right.
So that's kind of it's not a slam dunk, but that provides quite a bit of weight, I think. Is this word is used all over the place, and it always stands for a covenant, unless you translate it as a will here in verses 16 and 17. But if we just confine our studies to the book of Hebrews, we have to remember that the book of Hebrews is all about how Christ is superior to the old covenant, to the old diatheke.
Right.
Because a new diatheke has come. So the book is all about the new covenant.
Yes.
But then we come to we're in a passage that's all about the comparison between the old covenant and the new covenant. The verses around 16 and 17 are all about a covenant. Verse 15, he's the mediator of a new covenant, because he's died to redeem his people from transgressions committed under the first covenant. Verse 18 picks up with, therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. So we've got a tight grammatical structure that doesn't really make sense if verses 16 and 17, all of a sudden he's talking about a will.
Yeah.
Talking about a covenant, he's talking about a will, he's talking about a covenant, but you've got connecting words that they're not transitional. There's not a very clear transition from one subject to another. If he's talking about a covenant and then he's talking about a will, it'd be really difficult to
So
see that. If we're reading it in the
Right.
Greek, it would be really difficult to
see the will,
see the
Right.
wordplay.
the majority view
Mhm.
of like all the theologians you mentioned and preachers, that majority view sees these verses as supporting the first point we just talked about. How do we receive an inheritance?
Right.
Well, because a will has gone into effect,
And
inaugurated at the death.
the testator had to die.
Yes, and but that's not the argument that you're making.
Right.
It's a little different than that.
Right? Mhm.
What is the argument that you are making that these verses are teaching, if they're interpreted as covenant?
I think that the New American Standard and the Legacy Standard Bibles are better because they consistently translate the word as covenant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like where.
So you're trying to tell me that I need a new Bible for Christmas?
Well, Angie, if you're listening, if I remember teaching this passage to our small group back in Louisville years ago, and I was teaching it as covenant and arguing. I think that the ESV, I think the word will should be covenant,
mm-hmm.
and one of the guys just marked out the word and put covenant in there, and that's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
when someone is putting so much weight on your teaching that they're
Yeah.
willing to actually mark out a word in their Bible.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to put covenant, just put it off to the side. Like,
Would it made you feel better if he wrote diatheke?
diatheke, yeah, diatheke. Well, I like the words being translated consistently, because if you don't know that it's the same word, when you get to verse 16 and it says where a will is involved, you're just going to immediately assume that interpretation instead of thinking through the covenant position.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the word should be just consistently translated as a covenant.
Okay.
So another word that needs to be properly translated is at the end of verse 16. So where a covenant is involved, the death of the one who made it, that's one word. So the covenant maker must be established. It's actually the word for carry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember your Greek.
Mm.
It's pharaoh. It's to carry or
Mm-hmm.
to bring in,
Right.
or it must be born,
Mm.
borne,
Okay.
which is interesting because the writer is using words that are they have theological weight to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? That they're intentional, and this idea that it must be born, that reminds us of Isaiah 53,
Right.
where he has borne our griefs.
Yeah.
Which at the end of the passage in verse 28, he's going to allude to Isaiah 53 again,
Mm-hmm.
also, that he bore, or to bear the sins of many. That's Isaiah 53. So there could be
Right.
there could be a connection with Isaiah 53 that could be on his mind also, which is not a will. It's a covenant.
So your argument then is that the way you're interpreting these words as covenant is supporting the last part of verse 15. Since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the first part of verse 18, where he starts talking about the first covenant again with the word therefore, which is just a smooth transition, connecting those two ideas together. So I think that what's going on is, and we have to understand what the covenant he's thinking of
Right.
is, and thinking about what is involved in making a covenant.
Right.
So where a covenant is involved, the death of the one who made it must be brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So we think back to the Old Testament, and I brought out two examples:
Right.
Genesis chapter 15
Mm-hmm.
and Jeremiah chapter 34. So you've got in Genesis 15, you have God promising to Abraham that his offspring is going to inherit the land. There's a theological connection
Mm-hmm.
right there. We've already talked about. Abraham or Abram, he says, how can I know? Because I'm old, I don't have any children.
Yeah.
So God tells him, bring some animals, and Abram brings a heifer. Talked about the heifer last week, right? He cuts the heifer in half, so not across the middle, but just straight down, right? And lays the pieces side to side, and then he falls into kind of a deep sleep. It gets really dark, and he hears God saying, I'm promising that this will happen." And then he sees a flaming pot and a torch going between the
through.
pieces.
Right.
I think we talked about this on Friday. That this is not a Disney cartoon where these inanimate objects are floating. Someone's carrying them. It's just too dark to see who it is. And then in Jeremiah 34, you've got the king, and he tells the people to set their slaves free. They are not supposed to keep, every 7 years they're supposed to release their Hebrew slaves, and they haven't been doing it, so they do it, and then they make a covenant, but then they decide, no, we don't want to do that, so they take their slaves back. And God tells them, since you've done this, I'm going to make you like the calf that you cut in two. So what's going on in these covenant cutting? It's called cutting a covenant. Is you cut these animals in two, and then you walk between the pieces, and you are saying, "Let the same thing be done to me, as has happened to these animals, if I don't keep this covenant." Right, which is significant that only God walked between the pieces for Abram. Right, so he's taking both sides of the covenant. So the what's going on when they cut a covenant is they kill an animal as a representative of the person making the covenant. So you kill the animal, and you're saying, may I suffer the same fate if I don't keep the covenant. Right. So going back to Hebrews 9, where a covenant is involved, the death of the one who made it must be brought in. So there has to be that representative. The animal has to be there to die for the covenant to be enacted. Then verse 17, for a covenant takes effect only at death. That literally means a covenant is confirmed over dead things. Again, I like the ESV, but here it just causes some problems because it translates words in weird ways. Because only at death, the word's plural for one thing. Another, it's not a noun. It's a participle. So over dead things. So a covenant's confirmed over dead things, over sacrificed animals.
Right.
Since it is not in force or it's not strong, it's the word strong. It's not strong as long as the one who made the covenant is still alive. And that could be interpreted in two different ways. The covenant's not strong until the sacrificed animal is dead. Or I think the way I'm interpreting it is the covenant's not strong as long as the covenant curses haven't been enforced.
Right.
So you're making this because he doesn't have just a covenant in general in mind. Verses 18 through 22 tell us what covenant he's got in mind.
Right.
He's got the covenant that Moses inaugurated at Mount Sinai. So he's not just talking about, well, any covenant has to have this. He's talking specifically about this one. So he has in mind a broken covenant.
Yes.
So the covenant was It was established by these sacrificial animals. They kill these animals, and then Moses sprinkles the blood on the people. He tells them, here's the terms of the covenant. The people respond by everything that the Lord has said we will do.
Right.
And he sprinkles them with the blood. In other words, this animal stands as representative for you. If you don't keep this covenant, that's you. You're the dead. You're the dead thing, right? Now, if they had broken the covenant and they hadn't suffered the consequences, if a death hadn't been paid, then the covenant wouldn't be strong.
Mm-hmm.
It would be an empty threat. That's what we call them, right? An empty threat. So, in order for the covenant to be strong, this broken covenant, the death of the covenant maker has to be established, right?
Yeah.
You following me?
I am. I am following you.
All right. And so what's going on is that the people of Israel, they've made this covenant. This animal has stood as representative for them. They've said, we'll do all the covenant. We'll do everything God says. Moses sprinkles them with blood. You're dead if you break the covenant. And they've broken the covenant.
Right.
And so what has to happen? They have to die, right? Well, here's where Christ's death comes in.
Mm-hmm.
A death is owed. The covenant penalty has to be paid. It's either going to be the people or someone has to take their place.
Right.
And the only one who can take their place is Jesus. So he actually stands as the one who suffers the penalty. So the animals represent the people.
Gotcha.
They're supposed to die.
Okay.
Christ instead dies for the people.
Mm-hmm.
He takes the penalty of that broken covenant on himself.
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
how I'm interpreting it.
All right.
And I found a bunch of helpful. Even though it's the majority, the will position is the majority. I still found a good number of commentators and word studies that took the same position. One of the commentaries I read that pushed me further in this direction was a Jewish commentary.
Mm-hmm.
So this Jewish scholar, this Messianic Jew who lives in Jerusalem, he's written a New Testament commentary, kind of bringing out the Jewishness of it, and he takes the covenant position.
Mm.
So I was like, all right, that's good. I'm done. that's helpful. To see a Messianic Jew that probably has more understanding in the background than I do to take the covenant position was at least encouraging.
Aren't you You're partially Jewish,
Like
just a little bit. I won't tell Kanye West, but maybe
D.A. Carson. I was surprised. D.A. Carson and Greg Bill, they have their New Testament commentary, the Old Testament. I was reading their passage,
and they went that way
on this, and they take the covenant position also.
Oh,
yeah. So
good.
So I don't want to make it sound like there's this whole weight on one side, and George decides to be this contrarian.
Right.
There are other
people.
commentaries that explained it a lot better than I did. They're just not they're not as well known names. One guy's name is Gareth.
That's an interesting
Gareth
name.
Cockerill.
Okay. That's that's very unique.
He wrote the New International Version New Testament commentary.
Okay.
On Hebrews.
All right.
And he took this. Dennis Johnson. I don't know if you've heard that name. Dennis Johnson. He took that position. A.W. Pink. He wants to straddle the fence.
He does.
And say you gotta have both. You gotta have covenant and will in mind.
It could be a double entendre.
It could be, but the way that the structure of the argument, it kind of has to go one way or the other.
If we find out later
flow.
that John wrote this, then I'm saying it's a double
It's a
entendre
double-
because he does it all the time in the
All right.
Gospel of John,
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could be. I mean, I'm not. So the one commentator I read said that you have but a choice of difficulties, and take what view you please. Something will be left perplexed and unsatisfactory. That's always, an encouraging. That's always an encouraging sentence to see
Yeah.
when you're reading. I'm sure you've run across
Yeah.
that a lot in Ecclesiastes.
Mhm.
You just got to take a. There's not going to be a. Like, you're not going to fall into heresy
Well,
by taking one position over the other. I just think the covenant position makes more sense in the
flow.
flow of the
Right.
argument.
So I was going to reemphasize, whichever view you take, you're just going to emphasize a different portion of verse 15.
Right. Yeah.
So yours is emphasizing the latter half of verse 15.
So if you take the will position, it's just strengthening verse 15. He died so that
Mhm.
we might
have an inheritance.
Have an inheritance. If you take the covenant position, you view 15 as he died so that you get the blessings. 16 and 17 is he died so you don't get the curses.
That's right. Yeah. I do have one major objection, but I'm gonna hold it till we're done, till it's off.
Okay.
I don't want to bring it up on air
Okay.
because it's not. I don't want to like try to throw you under the bus like that or anything.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Hey, whatever you want to do, man.
No. I'm not about that.
These are many comment. I mean, almost all the commentators were like, this has divided
Oh yeah.
theologians. These are probably the two most difficult verses in the book of Hebrews.
Right.
And that's saying a lot because we had to go through Hebrews chapter 6.
Right. Yeah.
This has divided people more than the warning passage of Hebrews chapter 6 because it's...
And you got another one coming up.
Because
another verse coming up.
Yeah.
That's difficult.
Oh, I know it. But because the sentence structure is so weird, and because the word can be used in two different ways,
I thought you
it's
presented.
It's just difficult.
I thought you presented a good argument for your case.
It's just difficult.
And either whichever way you land, you are really trying to do justice to what's in the text. So you're not, either way you go, you're trying to interpret and understand better what's there.
And both of them are true.
Both
Whichever
of them are
direction
true.
you go, Christ died so that we might have an eternal inheritance.
Right.
Christ died taking the punishment, the curses
Yeah, I mean
for
he
sin on himself.
that's the last part of verse 15.
That's all over.
That death occurred to redeem us.
Right. So
Yeah.
so both of those are theologically true. The question is which one is being emphasized.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into 3 because we're in a super mega text-driven Tuesday. The third reason Christ's bloody death was necessary for the new covenant is so that the law would be fulfilled.
Mhm.
And we've talked about this a lot already, so probably don't have to spend a ton of time
Mhm.
on this. So let's kind of wrap it up with this last point.
By fulfilled, I mean bring it to its end, bring
Yeah.
it to its goal.
Mm-hmm.
So he
Verses 18 through 22.
So he brings out Exodus 24.
Mhm.
We already talked about it. Moses brings down the covenant. He tells it to the people of Israel. They say, we'll do all of it. He sprinkles them with blood. He sprinkles the book with blood. He sprinkles
Everything.
the tabernacle and the utensils and practically everything. That's
Even
what
the people.
Yeah, that's what verse 22 says. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood.
Mhm.
And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins.
Right.
So what should Israel have been expecting when they start hearing about a new covenant? They should be expecting this one's going to be inaugurated by blood also.
Mm-hmm.
If the old covenant is covered in blood, literally everything's
Right.
covered in blood, then how much more will this new covenant be covered in blood?
Yeah.
So what we should do when we read the Old Testament is we should see all of this is pointing to Jesus.
Yes.
And the Jews in the Old Testament should have been anticipating this.
Mm-hmm.
They had enough pieces that they could put it together, and they could have recognized the Messiah when he came. That's what Jesus tells the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Isn't this what the the Old Testament tells you? Isn't this what the law and the prophets and the writings all point to, that the Christ has to suffer and then enter into his glory? The old covenant was covered in blood. It was inaugurated with blood. The new covenant, which is a better covenant, has to be covered in even better blood. Not the blood of animals, but it has to be the blood of the Messiah himself.
And Peter, in First Peter, picks up on this. It can be. I mean, he's super clear. It's the very same idea.
Yeah.
I'll just read it. He writes to the elect exiles of the dispersion, and then in verse 2 he says, "According to the foreknowledge of God the Father, the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ, and for sprinkling with His blood."
Right.
So as the old covenant was cut, blood was sprinkled on the people.
Yep.
In the new covenant, we are sprinkled with the blood of Christ and made, and we are the chosen elect people of the new covenant.
What's interesting is that 18 through 22 is a chiasm. And we've talked about chiasms, how the first verses, they mirror the last verses, and the middle is what is supposed to be emphasized.
So we've been talking a lot about chiasms lately, George. You've talked about it. I talked about it. So the day I'm rolling down, we're driving to school, and I'm like, hey, let's pull out a little. There was a passage I was talking to my kids about. I was like, oh, and you guys think about this verse. It's a chiasm. And they're like, okay. And I was like, you guys know what a chiasm is, right? And they're like, no. And I said, unlock the car. I'm about to jump out of the car. And I'm just going to roll down the street.
You had a handout on chiasms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're doing a great job of teaching.
That's right. I talk about chiasms almost every Wednesday night as we're going through the Psalms. All these Psalms are chiasms, but the chiasm is supposed to emphasize the middle. The middle of this chiasm is verse 19. This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you. That's almost exactly what Jesus says to his disciples. It's almost word for word. He's emphasized, and the Gospels. Right. The Gospels have already. This is probably a little bit later than at least the three synoptic Gospels. Yeah. People are already hearing this. They should have immediately been like, Jesus said this.
This is Matthew 26. Yeah, Matthew 26.
Yeah, Jesus said this.
Yeah, he said that.
So Moses said this inaugurating the old covenant. Jesus said this right before he inaugurated the new covenant.
Yep.
The whole Old Testament is just this neon sign, this neon arrow pointing to Jesus and the cross. The Jews of the Old Testament should have been anticipating this, and these Christians that the writer of Hebrews is writing to, who are being tempted to leave the church to go back to the old covenant institutions, they need to be reminded this is what it was all pointing to. Don't go back, because this is the fulfillment of everything that the law talks about.
All right. Good job. All right. George, we may have set a record for Text Driven Tuesday.
You had one more question, though. What was your question?
No, I want to hold it for later. You want me? If I ask this question, George, we're going to be here another hour.
Okay. All right. Wow.
And I don't. And you did a good job with your argument, and I don't want to be like trying to undermine what the work you did. You know what I'm saying?
All right.
Because probably nobody else thought of it.
Okay.
Just us,
not Calvin.
Just
not,
no. Just I mean, like in the church,
okay.
Just us weird people that sit around staring at the wall, thinking about theology. Picking our beards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So, all right. Thanks for listening today. Super long Text Driven Tuesday. Ought to hold you over for a couple days, probably. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you know more about Hebrews now than you did before you listened. I know that I'm learning a lot about Hebrews as we're working through. One more sermon. Looking forward to it. And then who knows what we'll do? It'll be a surprise.
Do something else. I don't know.
I'll be back in Ecclesiastes, or maybe the other elders will jump in.
Okay.
That's always open for them during the December period. But if this has been a blessing to you, please like, subscribe, share, maybe even write us a review and help us get the word out there. It's our hope this helps you to be more conformed to Christ. See you at Text Driven Tuesday. No, wait.
Free for all Friday.
Free for all Friday. See ya for Free for all Friday. See ya.